Hey guys, tonight we travel to a world where money jingled, sparkled, and sometimes got tangled in your hair, a place where bright colours spoke louder than price tags, and transactions were made not with cold, hard coins, but with warm, handmade beads. You find yourself wandering through a bustling, sun-drenched market in an ancient African city, and your pockets, well, they're full of string, beaded string. Welcome to the bead bazaar, where value hangs on your belt and the clink of a bracelet might be more important than your name. You've stepped into a time and place where the idea of money is a little looser, a little livelier. Not the kind you swipe or tap, but the kind you wear. You pass under tattered awnings made of woven palm fronds. The air smells of roasted yams, river clay, and maybe something slightly fermented. Traders shout softly, not to startle the goats wandering between their stalls. And everyone is watching your ankles. Why? Because you're new and you're wearing beads. Lots of them. And some of those beads might just buy a cow before we go any further, though. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to see how far these sleepy tales travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You adjust your footing on the packed dirt floor of the marketplace, feeling the warmth of the afternoon still radiating upward through your sandals. The buzz around you isn't frantic, just alive. Like bees humming politely, you pass an old woman who's squatting beside a mat covered in tiny glittering beads. Not sorted, not packaged, just there. Some are shaped like seeds, others like flattened droplets of rain. Reds, blues, browns, milky whites. She nods at you slowly and says something in a dialect you can't place, but you know the tone. She's quoting a price. You kneel, and just like that, you're part of the rhythm. Now, here's your first real surprise. In many African kingdoms, some as early as 1000 BCE, beads weren't just accessories, they were currency. They moved through empires the way coins moved through Europe or paper through Ming China. Kingdoms like If, Benin, Mali, and Kongo didn't just use beads, they shaped their entire economies and identities around them. That little red bead in your palm, it might be worth a goat, or 3 bowls of millet, or a marriage proposal, but only if it's the right type. Now, let's zoom in. The reason beads worked as money had a lot to do with scarcity. Yes, but also beauty and portability. Imagine trying to lug around 3 sacks of grain every time you wanted to buy a chicken. A string of beads, light enough to wear, was a far more elegant solution. And because many African societies were not heavily monetized in the coinage sense, the concept of wealth was tied to things you could trade, store, and wear. A man might carry his bank account on his chest. A woman's ankles might jingle with what amounted to rent payments. But it wasn't just about practicality. These beads had meaning layered into them like an onion wearing jewellery. Some were carved from bones or ivory. Others were shaped from fired clay, rolled between fingers still smudged with charcoal. Then there were the glass ones, imported from Venice and India, gorgeous, rare, and sometimes cursed, depending on who you asked. Historians still argue whether beads first came to prominence through trade or through spiritual significance. One school believes they were spiritual objects that became money. Another argues the opposite, that their monetary function elevated them to sacred status. Either way, They weren't just pretty, they had weight, not literal weight though. Beads weren't measured by weight, but by length or string count. You might trade a hand's length of blue beads for a loaf of bread, or one girdle of red beads for a goat. And yes, it led to arguments. Was your hand longer than mine? Did you sneak extra knots onto your string to make it look longer? It was a world where money could shrink in the rain. But that didn't stop the system from flourishing. In some markets, entire stalls were set up just for measuring bead strings with bone rulers and finger widths. Little bead banks existed more like huts, really where elders stored important strings and passed down wealth generation to generation. And if someone died, their bead wealth didn't go to the grave with them, unless it did. We'll get to that morbid little detail later. The old woman in the market seems to like you. She waves you off with a crooked smile after you admire her wares, slipping a single clay bead into your palm. A gift, perhaps, or maybe a test. Either way, she's just welcomed you into an ancient, complex economy where the word banknote might be made of shell and strung with sinew. The day winds on, and your arms grow heavy with the weight of bright threads slung over your shoulders. The sun lowers, dyeing the air amber. A drummer starts up somewhere near the mango stalls. A child runs past, giggling, with 2 long bead strands clutched in her hand like stolen treasure. You smile, knowing you've taken your first steps into a world where the sparkle of a bead is worth more than a signature, more than a barcode, maybe even more than your word. And this is just the beginning. The next morning, you're jolted awake not by an alarm clock, but by the sound of cowbells, goat hooves, and someone sloshing water into a wooden trough. You sit up beneath your woven blanket, beads still wrapped tightly around your wrist like a second skin. The market's already stirring. Traders yawn and stretch, warn. Some are inspecting their bead stock under the light of a rising sun that paints everything in golden clay. You've heard of coins. Of course, shiny little discs that fit snugly in wallets. But long before such things jingled across most of Africa, people used what they had, and what they had often glittered. Cowries, stones, beads, tiny, portable objects that packed big value. And today, we're going to walk through the ancient aisles of an even older economy, one where the shell was king. Let's start with a cowrie. You might have seen one before, a small, smooth, white shell with a slit down the middle like a sleeping eye. Doesn't look like much until you realize that at one point it could buy you land, or a bride, or the freedom of someone who'd been captured. Cowrie shells aren't native to most of Africa. They come from the warm, shallow waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So how did they end up scattered across the continent like fairy coins? The answer lies in long-distance trade. Arab, Indian, and eventually European traders brought them in by the sackful, often exchanging them for gold, ivory, or worse, humans. The shells, in turn, infiltrated local economies so deeply that they effectively became cash. Imagine trying to buy lunch using pocketfuls of seashells. You probably wouldn't survive the cashier's stare, but in places like Mali, Hausa territories, and along the Swahili coast, cowries were the real deal. In the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa, yes, the guy who literally broke Cairo's economy with his wealth, cowries flowed like water. They weren't just currency, they were a statement. You walk past a bead seller now, crouched low beside a mat. She's not dealing in glass today, but in worn, weathered cowries strung into belts. She raises one and says, "Bride price," then holds up a second and says, 2 chickens. Her pricing is brisk, confident, and totally ungoogleable. But let's not pretend this system was perfect. One quirky little tidbit: some rulers started importing too many cowries, especially once the Europeans got involved, in what could only be described as a pre-industrial inflation spiral. Entire kingdoms suddenly found themselves drowning in seashells. What once bought a goat now bought a carrot. What bought a wife might now get you a wife's slipper. Maybe. Historians still argue whether this influx was a planned economic move or an unintended consequence of overenthusiastic trade. Was it currency manipulation or just really bad math? The debate continues, mostly in very dry academic papers and occasionally in bead museums with terrible air conditioning. But the cowries weren't alone. Long before mass imports, some African kingdoms used stone beads shaped like elongated seeds. These were carved with loving detail, traded carefully and stored like gold nuggets. In places like the Nok culture of Nigeria or early Chad Basin communities, these beads served double duty as money and as magic. Some were believed to carry luck, others were cursed. You wouldn't want to spend one of those at the bread stall. And then there were iron currency pieces heavy, ornate objects shaped like paddles, spirals, or stylized people, technically not beads, but sometimes traded with them. They were too big to carry in a pouch, which made stealing them a real backache. Convenient, right now. Crouch here with me beside a trading elder. He's old enough to remember when people still measured worth in the number of shell strings you could balance across both arms. He tells you slowly, between pulls on a sweetened cola nut, how deals were once made, not in signed contracts, but in looked-in-the-eye handshakes. You'd slide a bundle of beads across a reed mat, nod once, and that was that. Payment confirmed. Return policy. Hope you chose wisely. We step further into the market and see kids playing with beads, mimicking grown-up traders. It's both adorable and slightly ominous child's play, echoing an ancient economy. One girl is teaching her younger brother the bead-counting song, a rhythmic chant that helps you tally out payment without losing track, kind of like the world's slowest, most tuneful calculator. But as you pass deeper into this patchwork of stalls, you notice the subtle changes in bead styles. Here, long strings of uniform white. There, beads shaped like fish. And over there, a bundle of crimson glass so vibrant it almost hums. Not all of this is local. Some of it's come from hundreds, even thousands of miles away. Venice, India, the Arabian Gulf all funneled their glittering currency into African hands. And those hands knew exactly what to do with them. You stop beside a string of black beads and lift it gently. It's warm from the sun. Smooth, but not too smooth. The kind that slips through fingers like whispers. It's easy to forget you're not just holding decoration, you're holding value. Capital, currency, an entire economic past that's still barely understood. The bead seller smiles at your interest, then tilts his head and says, "That one worth a cow, or a coffin. Depends how your week's going." You blink, unsure whether to laugh or nod. He winks, and just like that, your walk through the earliest economies of Africa takes a sudden, strange turn. These weren't just financial systems. They were cultural performances, deeply embedded in memory, music, and even magic. Trade wasn't just trade. It was a ritual. So as the sun reaches its high noon perch and the traders begin to shade their stalls, You tighten the string of beads around your wrist and wonder what you're really carrying. Money history. A bit of both. The market takes a breath in the heat of noon, and so do you. You sit cross-legged in the shade of a mango tree, beads still wrapped tight around your wrist, now sticky with sweat and sun. A gourd of warm water passes your way, and somewhere in the quiet, you hear the unmistakable clink of glass beads shifting in a wooden box. That sounds soft, deliberate. Like rain on polished stone is the heartbeat of an entire forgotten economy. And now we come to a moment in history when glass meant gold. You're watching a group of traders unfurl a piece of dyed cloth on the ground, revealing rows of glittering beads, blues like the deep ocean, reds that almost glow in the light, and greens so sharp they look wet. These aren't just any beads, these are imports. European, mostly, and they've caused quite the stir. Let's zoom out a bit. Around the 15th century, just as Europe was getting really good at sailing and a little too confident about map-making, Venetian and Bohemian glassmakers started mass-producing beads. These weren't delicate or ornamental, not yet. They were made fast, made bright, and made cheap. And yet, somehow, when these little globs of glass reached African ports like Elmina, Ouida, and Luanda, they were met with awe. Imagine being a coastal trader back then standing in front of a Portuguese captain who is clearly wearing way too much lace, offering you a handful of beads in exchange for your salt, your ivory, or your neighbours. That part of history grim, no sugar coating it. These beads often oiled the gears of the Atlantic slave trade. They were dazzling. They were deceptive. Historians still argue whether African leaders were duped by these beads or used them strategically to control internal trade networks. Did they overvalue foreign glass, or did they simply recognize that demand creates worth? It's not a comfortable question, but it's an essential one. What is clear, though, is that these glass beads nicknamed trade beads, or agri beads by Europeans, became instant status symbols. A string of cobalt blue could be more desirable than gold, especially inland, where such colours were rare as unicorns. Chiefs, nobles, even priests collected them the way tech bros today collect NFTs. They adorned their bodies, their staffs, their shrines. Some were even buried in full bead armour, like glittering husks of wealth. You shift slightly in your seat as a boy skips past, a pouch of glass beads bouncing at his hip. He's not just showing off, he's signalling his family's wealth, maybe even his own betrothal price. That's the thing with bead culture. Everything is layered. A colour might mean wealth, but it might also mean available, or off limits, or mourning. You'd better hope you wore the right set to the right gathering, or you could accidentally propose to someone's grandmother. And here's a fun fringe tidbit: some of the most prized beads weren't even European. They came from India, shaped like eyes, big, watchful, and supposedly magical. These eye beads were thought to ward off spirits, curses, and nosy in-laws. One legend claims that a single eye bead could protect a village from disease, though, oddly, they never stopped mosquitoes. You're invited now into a merchant's compound, a shaded courtyard lined with reed baskets overflowing with beads. He walks you through his inventory, which, to you, looks like a rainbow exploded on the floor. But to him, each cluster has value, purpose, and a long lineage of trades behind it. He lifts a red disc bead the size of a thumbnail and says, "This one came from Venice, traded for cola nuts, then gold, then it came back with my grandfather." You try to calculate its worth, but he just smiles and sets it down again. Some things are more valuable when you can't put a price on them. And then, in the shade, he opens a clay jar and shows you a bead that seems to shimmer from within. A Dutch feather bead, striped like a bird's wing. It's a rare find, traded possibly just once a generation. He won't tell you what it's worth, but the look on his face says, everything. As you leave, you can't help but notice that this place, this sleepy trade hub, has no banks, no vaults, no credit cards or crypto wallets. Yet it hums with commerce, it breathes value. All stored in threads, in loops, in tiny handmade things you could accidentally swallow if you sneezed too hard. And here's a strange little side note in some regions. Beads were melted down and reshaped. Imagine melting your wallet to make a prettier one, or snapping your Visa card in half to pay for coffee. It was both art and economy, mutable, flowing, impermanent. By mid-afternoon, the market stirs again. New traders arrive with cloth, honey, and brass. But all eyes go to the bead merchants. Why? Because they control the pulse of trade, the rhythm of wealth. One wrong trade, and your reputation unravels like a broken string. And that's the other thing, beads weren't just wealth. They were trust. Each trade tied you to someone else, each string a contract, soft but binding. So as you adjust the growing weight of your bead-wrapped wrist and feel the sun dipping low again, you realize you're not just watching history, you're wearing it. The next day arrives with the gentle thump of sandals on packed earth and the scent of roasted cassava floating through the village breeze. You stretch beneath your raffia mat roof, beads still snug against your wrist, and feel a strange satisfaction in their familiar clink. You rise slowly, careful not to jingle too much like a festive tambourine, and wander toward the city gates of one of the most famous kingdoms to ever turn beads into authority, the Kingdom of Benin. Not to be confused with modern-day Benin, a polite little twist of colonial map wrangling. This Benin was a powerhouse located in what is now southern Nigeria. And here, beads weren't just currency, they were sovereignty. As you pass under an ancient arch carved with weathered leopards and geometric patterns, a cool hush greets you. You're now inside the royal precinct, where walls of red clay rise tall and silent, and guards wear strings of coral beads across their chests like sashes of silent thunder. You don't speak, because in Benin, beads speak for you. It's not long before you're ushered into the courtyard of a palace. But don't let the word palace fool you. It's less Versailles, more architectural earthwork, with centuries of mystique baked into its bricks. The Oba, or king, doesn't appear immediately. That would be too simple. Instead, attendants appear one by one, each adorned with layer upon layer of coral beads, thick chokers, weighty anklets, and headdresses so full they seem to carry the weight of rain clouds. These are not just ornaments. In Benin, coral beads are royal regalia. Ownership and even the right to wear them are strictly controlled by the Oba himself. You couldn't just walk into a market and buy a coral necklace for Auntie's birthday. Nope. You needed permission, often granted through title, lineage, or extraordinary service to the kingdom. Wearing coral without permission. It wasn't just a fashion faux pas, it could get you exiled, or worse, unbeaded. Historians still argue whether this coral bead tradition began with Portuguese trade, or earlier with local coastal cultures. Some suggest coral from the Mediterranean made its way via Arabic routes before the Portuguese even dreamed of navigation. Others insist the symbolism was entirely homegrown, with foreign traders merely feeding an already bead-hungry elite. What we do know is that these beads, often called iwi in the Edo language, were far more than economic markers. They were spiritual, political, magical. If you ask the palace priests, coral was believed to house life force and essence that shimmered like light on water. It came from the ocean, from the ancestors, from mystery itself. You find yourself standing near a shrine to the royal ancestors. Coral beads drape every surface. Statues wear them like armor. You're told these are not just decorations but living garments linking the dead to the living in a chain that cannot be broken. And the Oba, he's not just a ruler, he's a node in that chain. A living, breathing, beaded extension of divine right. You're introduced to one of the guild craftsmen, yes, guilds. Benin had entire professional guilds for bronze casting, ivory carving, and of course, beadwork. His hands are calloused, stained with red dust and time. He tells you how beads are strung according to ceremony clockwise for coronations, counterclockwise for funerals. Some patterns must never be repeated. Others are reserved for one person, only the Oba himself. You ask, perhaps a bit cheekily, if you can wear a strand. He laughs, a deep, kindly laugh that suggests you're lucky to still be wearing your shoes. Instead, he shows you a belt of coral meant for an incoming chief. Each bead has a tiny notch indicating its blessing, its previous owner, or some mysterious tally that only the palace priests seem to understand. In this belt is recorded a lifetime of service, a network of debts, honours, and whispered deals. Beads as biography. There's one particularly large bead in the centre, bright red, with swirls carved along its sides. This one, the craftsman says, was worn by 5 chiefs. It has seen war, peace, plague, and too many weddings. He places it in your palm and you feel a weight far beyond its size, not heavy but dense, like holding a memory. A quirky little fact for you: Benin's coral beads are often cylindrical and cut from whole coral branches. This means their creation involved carefully slicing through the twisted, knotted arms of deep-sea formations no easy feat. Add to that the lengthy polishing and stringing process, and you're looking at a value far beyond any spreadsheet's reach. And remember, you couldn't just have coral beads. You had to earn them. As evening falls over the city, the Oba finally appears cloaked in layers of crimson, coral, and silence. His arrival hushes even the birds. He doesn't speak much. He doesn't have to. His beads do the talking. Each string says, "I am the king. I hold the past. I shape the future." And you, little traveller in dusty sandals, can only nod in sleepy reverence. Here in Benin, to be beaded is to belong, and to belong is to live within a language made not of words but of colour, pattern, and history strung carefully across time. You leave the regal hush of Benin behind, your mind still pulsing with the echo of coral beads and ceremonial silences. The landscape changes as you move west and then sweep downward into the humid green of Central Africa toward the lands once ruled by the Kingdom of Kongo. The air is heavier here. The forests are dense, humid enough to wrap around your skin like a damp cloak. The birds call louder, the rivers run broader, and even the paths feel softer underfoot, padded with centuries of fallen leaves and secrets. But make no mistake, trade routes carve through this vast greenery like veins, and at the centre of it, all beads. In the Kongo kingdom, beads weren't just decoration. nor even mere currency. They were diplomatic tools, travelling with envoys and messengers through the tangled forest roads like stringed sentences, spelling out intent, allegiance, and wealth. You find yourself now beside a merchant caravan, not a straight line of camels like in the desert, but a curved, fluid motion of men, women, and porters carrying goods on heads and backs, palm wine, raffia cloth, bundles of salt, and small wooden boxes filled with beads so valuable they're counted out in hushed tones. They pause for rest near a wide-bellied tree, and you're welcomed into their circle with a small cup of fermented honey drink. A boy offers you a belt. It's woven leather thick with black and turquoise beads. He gestures at it, proudly. This isn't just an accessory, it's a portable ledger. Each section of beads is knotted and spaced in ways that record trades made, payments owed, or gifts given. You try to read it, but it's like decoding a beaded spreadsheet written in Morse code. One of the porters laughs and points to a crimson bead set off near the belt's end. That one means settled debt, he says, or possibly bad chicken. Depends who you ask. And that's the beautiful chaos of it in Kongo. Beads weren't standardized in the way coins are. Value fluctuated by region, by scarcity, by color, by story. A bead found upriver might be worthless by the coast, while a dull clay one from across the border could buy you a feast. The system thrived not on consistency, but on negotiation. Historians still argue whether this fluidity was a strength or a vulnerability. Some say it fostered more inclusive trade, allowing for endless nuance and flexibility. Others argue it created confusion and made fraud easier. But you sit there watching a group of traders tally a complicated multi-person transaction entirely through finger knots and bead swaps, and it works. It's graceful, even a little hypnotic. And yes, the Kingdom of Kongo had contact with the Portuguese, beginning as early as the late 1400s. Glass beads flooded in, especially blue and white ones, which the Kongo elite eagerly adopted. But rather than replacing the existing system, these imports were woven into it, quite literally. Beads from Venice sat comfortably next to local clay and shell pieces, forming hybrids of cultural expression and economic function. One quirky tidbit: Kongo kings reportedly wore massive, weighty necklaces of beads not only for their beauty, but because they jingled audibly when the king walked, an intentional reminder to the court and to the spirits that power was present. As you walk through a village clearing, you pass a young couple being married. The bride is adorned in a tunic laced with hundreds of dark red beads. She moves slowly, each step measured, not from nerves, but from the sheer mass of her wearable wealth. Her dowry isn't locked in a chest, it walks with her. An elder officiates the ceremony with a chant and a gesture toward a small gourd. Inside, more beads, which are poured into the hands of the couple like water from a sacred spring. This is your beginning, he says, your shared string. And just when you think it can't get more symbolic, he ties a literal string of beads between their wrists. They'll wear it for 7 days, never cutting or removing it until it is unknotted by a priest as a blessing for longevity. Lose the string, bad omen. Keep it intact. Marriage bliss. Or at least fewer arguments about goats. Even death in Kongo didn't end your relationship with beads. They were buried with the dead, tucked into hands, placed in mouths, or wrapped around limbs. Some were believed to help guide the soul to the ancestors. Others, a kind of posthumous payment, just in case there were toll roads in the spirit world. There's a burial ground nearby, where archaeologists uncovered graves lined with beads that had long since dulled with soil and time. Still, they whispered stories of traders and warriors, children and elders, all woven into this lush, green kingdom that once pulsed with life and movement. You pause there, beside one weathered mound, listening to the sound of the forest breathing around you. The beads, now invisible beneath the earth, seem to hum faintly beneath your feet. Not voices, exactly just the quiet echo of an old economy that never needed vaults. Just memory. As you make your way back to the caravan, the sun dips low, colouring the forest canopy in copper and wine. A girl offers you a bead bracelet in exchange for a story. You tell her one about a place far away where people use cards and codes instead of coral and clay. She looks at you, unimpressed. Her bracelet jingles. The real currency is still hers. You're walking now along a wind-smooth trail flanked by whispering grass and scattered acacia trees, your feet tracing the quiet footsteps of a traveller heading toward Africa's eastern coast. The forest gives way to a humid salt breeze, and the air thickens with ocean stories. Welcome to the Swahili coast, a string of ancient cities hugging the Indian Ocean, where trade bloomed. Languages braided, and beads didn't just buy things, they bought influence. Ahead of you, a coastal chief sits beneath a wooden veranda draped in woven mats. He doesn't look up as you approach. He's busy sliding strings of beads between his fingers, counting slowly, almost meditatively. These aren't just tokens of wealth. Each strand is a tether to political loyalty. One string for an ally inland, one for a promised marriage between rival clans. Another, a thin blue line, signals a recent trade pact with a dhow captain from Oman. You take a seat near the chief, careful not to disturb the order of beads laid out before him like chess pieces. This isn't commerce. This is diplomacy in jewellery form, here on the Swahili coast, stretching from modern-day Kenya down to Mozambique. City-states like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Lamu thrived on trade that flowed across the Indian Ocean like breath. Gold, ivory, spices, and beads. Beads made in India, Persia, and later Europe. Beads passed between hands that spoke Arabic, Swahili, Persian, and Bantu tongues. It was less a melting pot and more a tide pool, diverse, tidal, and teeming with shiny things. Historians still argue whether beads were the cause of these city-states' economic strength, or merely a glittering byproduct. Some suggest that the demand for beads drove entire trade networks. Others think beads just piggybacked on the back of bigger ticket items like gold and slaves. But when you look at the archaeological layers, bead upon bead buried in ancient courtyards, you get the sense they weren't just passengers. They were the pulse. The chief beside you finally speaks. A man with beads, he says slowly, has friends. A man with words has promises. A man with both has power. You're not entirely sure if that's praise or warning, but you nod like it's both. One fringe tidbit: some Swahili city-states used beads in their court systems, not for bribes, not officially, but as offerings during trials, especially those involving marriage disputes or land rights. A particular string might represent a family standing or a past gift that implied a promise. Imagine trying to prove a verbal agreement in court by waving a beaded bracelet. Strange, yes, but here it worked. You watch a group of women enter the courtyard, arms shimmering with delicate bangles made of translucent pink and pale green glass. They move with quiet authority. In Swahili society, Women were central to trade and household wealth. Beadwork wasn't just a craft, it was a language. Certain patterns spoke of clan ties, widowhood, or fertility. A woman's beadwork could attract suitors or send them running. You pass one woman in particular who is stitching blue beads onto a strip of leather. She gestures for you to sit, then shows you how she arranges the colours white for peace, red for strength, green for lineage, blue for the sea. She explains that this pattern is for a wedding gift. It will speak for the bride when she cannot speak, she says softly. The groom will read it with his eyes, not his ears. There's something hauntingly beautiful about this, an entire lexicon strung together in loops and rows. You think again of your own world, of endless legal documents and digitized contracts. This is the opposite. It's soft, it's personal, and it can be worn around the neck. The chief now receives a guest, a coastal merchant just arrived by dhow, salt-crusted sandals, sunburned nose, and a pouch full of trade beads clinking like tiny promises. He bows, unrolls a cloth, and reveals his wares new beads, mostly from India, smooth, glimmering, irregular like drops of coloured rain. A few are ancient-looking, recycled from older strings, older trades, older meanings. The negotiation begins not with numbers, but with stories, where each bead came from, who last wore them, what they were traded for last season. It's not the kind of business you rush. Each bead is a chapter. The price, subjective, emotional, possibly spiritual. And here's a fun little twist. Some beads were used for identification. In certain Swahili communities, slaves or servants were given bead collars not necessarily as punishment, but as symbols of belonging, rank, or even protection under a patron. It's a deeply uncomfortable truth, tangled in the complexities of a society where identity could be both adorned and assigned. As dusk rolls in, the veranda is lit by oil lamps, and the ocean begins to hum its night song. The merchant departs with a head nod and slightly lighter pouches. The chief, satisfied, begins to reknot his bead strings, careful not to let them tangle. Each loop he completes is a quiet reminder, alliances maintained, promises extended, status upheld. You lie back, arms behind your head, staring up at the stars over the sea. Somewhere out there, other dhows sail, other deals are struck, and other strings of meaning are wrapped carefully into bags of salt and baskets of saffron. And here, beneath the quiet power of the coast and the hypnotic hush of the waves, beads speak softly but clearly. They say you belong. You wake to the crackle of camel hooves on gravel and the sound of dry wind whispering through sparse scrub. Gone is the moist ocean air of the Swahili coast. You've stepped inland now, where the heat arrives not with a sweat, but with a thirst. Welcome to the Saharan fringe, where the sun rules like a harsh emperor and beads ride on the backs of camels across its golden heart. You adjust your turban, already caked with red dust, and fall in beside a northbound caravan. The camels grunt and sway like old ships at sea, their cargo strapped in layer salt slabs, ostrich feathers, woven mats, and, of course, pouches of beads tucked into saddlebags like contraband treasure. This is no pleasure ride. These traders are part of the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, a lifeline of wealth and culture that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Islamic world, and even as far as Europe and Asia. They cross not just sand dunes, but entire civilizations, and they do it with beads. Some of the oldest trade routes ran from places like Timbuktu and Gao, cutting through the Sahel and slicing up into North Africa like fibrous threads pulled tight across a dry canvas. And what travelled along those threads? Gold. Sheer? Salt. Definitely. But often overlooked beads, and not just beads as jewellery, but beads as money, beads as religious symbols, beads as messages passed between dynasties and desert fortresses, glass beads from Cairo or Damascus, agate beads from India, and locally made stone or shell beads that had to survive not only the fires of the kiln, but also the fires of the desert sun. Historians still argue whether these beads were secondary cargo brought along as personal trinkets or central items of trade. Some camel manifests show beads listed only as garnish. Others suggest that in certain regions, beads could buy a full load of salt. One historian even wrote that in the Tagaza salt mines, workers preferred payment in beads over coin. Whether that's fact or romantic exaggeration, still up for debate. You ride beside a griot now, a storyteller whose tongue could turn dust into gold if the audience was generous. He shares the tale of a legendary Tuareg trader who once smuggled a string of blue glass beads across 5 kingdoms, avoiding bandits, bribes, and betrayal, only to lose the entire bundle to a jealous lover in Tripoli. True story. Probably not, but in the desert, stories are currency. The sun blazes overhead. You stop at an oasis ringed with date palms and cracked water basins. As traders water the camels and bathe their feet, deals quietly unfold in the shade. You watch 2 men crouch over a strip of patterned cloth, slowly counting out beads in exchange for, what is that dried fish? No, a small leather-bound book, likely Quranic. Beads for a book, faith for a fashion, or maybe it's the other way around. One of the traders shows you his favourite, an orange-red carnelian bead, etched with Arabic script. For protection, he whispers, and for luck when trading with fools. You nod solemnly, pocketing the phrase for later use. There's a curious little practice among some Berber groups here when making significant deals. The beads are not handed over directly. They are buried in the sand between the 2 parties, then uncovered together, symbolic of honesty, of trust rising from the earth. It's part ritual, part insurance policy. You don't get many do-overs in the desert. Later, as the sun begins to fall into a mirage-soaked horizon, the caravan pitches camp. The camels groan their relief. Fires are lit, couscous is cooked, and a small bead market blooms in the heart of the dunes. You walk through it, half in a dream. Traders sitting cross-legged on patterned blankets, displaying their wares like treasure from shipwrecks that never saw the sea. Blue glass, bone white, copper flecked, some so old they're nearly translucent with time. A boy beckons you over. He offers a single, perfectly spherical bead, a milky green one with faint internal swirls. Desert moon, he says with a grin. One only. You ask what he wants in return. He pauses, then points at your sandals. They're not fancy, but they're less worn than his. And so, in the flickering firelight, you trade footwear for a fragment of Saharan starlight. That night, as you lie in the sand with the sky spread above like a canvas of endless ink, you hold the bead up to the moon. It catches the light just right, glowing faintly in your hand. In that moment, you understand something quietly profound. Beads are proof of passage, of exchange, of story. They carry memory not just personal, but global, and in this harshest of landscapes, they survive. And here, under 1 billion stars with no city in sight, the clink of a single bead tells you you are still connected. The desert wind fades behind you now, and you're following a dusty road westward, deeper into the heart of Nigeria toward a place where time once pooled in bronze, terracotta, and beads so old they remember things no one else does. Welcome to Igbo Ukwu, a quiet hill town hiding a treasure that baffled even the most seasoned archaeologists. You arrive just before dusk. The air is still, and the earth feels strangely charged, as if secrets are coiled beneath the ground waiting to breathe. Children play with bead necklaces strung from plastic and thread, unaware that not far beneath their feet, some of the finest ancient beads in Africa once rested undisturbed for nearly 1,000 years. It was 1938 when a local man digging a cistern stumbled upon something odd, a bronze bowl, then a scepter, then an avalanche of glass beads, copper wires, and intricate ornaments that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. Fast forward a few decades, and Igbo Ukwu becomes one of the most important archaeological sites on the continent, and the beads... Oh, the beads were everywhere. You walk now with a local guide who shows you a replica of the first discovery site. He points to a shaded patch of earth where artisans, centuries ago, sat stringing beads and melting metal in ways that still baffle metallurgists. We don't even know how they made some of the bronze work, he says with a shrug. They just knew. But what caught scholars off guard wasn't just the craftsmanship, it was the trade evidence. Many of the beads discovered here weren't local. Some were Indian. Others likely came from the Middle East, meaning this tiny town had trade links that reached across deserts, rivers, and oceans long before colonial boots touched African soil. Historians still argue whether Igbo Ukwu was a religious centre, a royal grave site, or a kind of sacred deposit box where offerings piled up like spiritual savings accounts. The purpose of the beads remains elusive. Were they currency burial markers, ritual tools, or simply beautiful objects tied to identity and belief? One theory says the beads were part of funerary rites. Another insists they were worn only by high-ranking members of society, perhaps priests or early kings. Yet another suggests they were buried intentionally during times of crisis, like hiding your bank account under the bed during a financial apocalypse. And here's your quirky fact of the day. Some of the beads were so perfectly spherical and finely perforated that even with modern tools, replicating them exactly has proven difficult. One archaeologist joked they might have had tiny bead aliens helping them. Don't quote him at conference. You're led into a small museum nearby, where the air is chilled unnaturally and the glass cases hum softly under fluorescent lights. Inside one display, you see strings of dusty blue, pale green, and rich amber beads laid carefully across velvet. No two are alike. Some shimmer slightly. Others seem to absorb light. It's like staring at the memory of the marketplace frozen in time. A label reads Burial Chamber, 9th century CE. Beads recovered from royal context, composition glass, carnelian, bronze. Another simply says origin unknown, unknown, the most tantalizing word in archaeology. You step back outside as the sun settles into the red soil. Villagers are beginning to light cooking fires. The smell of groundnut stew and grilled yam drifts through the twilight. Someone plays a talking drum in the distance, and you feel, just for a moment, like you're walking through overlapping layers of time. You pass a woman selling modern bead bracelets under a tin awning. You buy one simple plastic mass-produced, but still pleasing. She smiles, then points at your wrist where the green Saharan bead still sits. That one, she says, eyes wide. That one is real. You nod. But what does real mean? Is it about age value? Or the story it carries? You sit nearby, watching the stars return, and remember the archaeologist's words. Sometimes beads outlive the people who made them, and sometimes they're all that's left to tell the story. Here at Igbo Ukwu, beneath your feet, those stories are still whispering, in glass, in bronze, in threads of colour strung between the living and the dead, between memory and myth. And you're not just here to listen, you're here to remember. By now your feet know the rhythm of the road, and your wrists jingle softly with a weight of stories disguised as beads. You turn southwest, toward the region once ruled by the ancient empire of Ghana, not the modern country, but a sprawling kingdom of gold, trade, and vibrant marketplaces that buzzed long before most European maps had Africa sketched with anything but guesswork. You enter through the outer markets first, no city walls here, just clusters of trade pavilions and shade trees under which people barter like poets. Here, beads weren't just currency, they were signals. One look at someone's bangles could tell you where they were from, what they were trading, and whether you'd better greet them with a smile or a careful nod. The Ghana Empire, which flourished from roughly the 6th to the 13th century CE, was a magnet for merchants, salt from the Sahara, gold from the forested south, horses from the north, and beads. Beads were everywhere, often used to seal deals, symbolize trust, or decorate a person wealthy enough to be the deal. You watch now as a young trader approaches a mat covered in polished bangle bracelets, each carved from stone, ivory, or clay, then adorned with tiny beads pressed into their edges. The vendor doesn't speak immediately. Instead, she slides 3 bangles forward, each with a distinct pattern, red, black, red for warriors, blue, green, blue for merchants, and a full spiral of yellows for women of noble rank. The buyer picks the spiral. No words exchanged, just a nod, and the clink of a goat's horn full of beads being poured into a gourd. You blink. That's how fast deals happen here. The Ghanaian economy was famously dual-layered, the silent barter system, yes. Silent for dealing with foreign traders, especially those who didn't share the same language or trust, and the loud, social, competitive market culture for internal trade. Beads operated beautifully in both. In the silent barter system, traders would leave goods at a designated spot, step back and wait. The other party would approach, leave their offer, often including beads as sweeteners, and retreat. This back and forth could go on for hours or even days, with neither party speaking a single word. Beads helped bridge that quiet space. Their colour, quantity, and quality often conveyed more sincerity than speech. Historians still debate whether this system developed due to linguistic divides, religious customs, or just a deep-seated love of mystery. Whatever the reason, it worked for centuries. Entire fortunes were built on silent nods and careful bead placements. And here's a fun little fringe detail in some parts of the Ghana Empire. Beads were baked into ceramic tiles that lined shrines and royal walkways. These weren't just decorative. They were believed to store the blessings of passers-by, each footstep adding a layer of spiritual capital. Step on them with dirty feet, bad luck. Step on them after a victory, they'd sing in your honour. You're led now to a gathering under a baobab tree, where elders pass around a curved horn filled with bead bangles worn only during naming ceremonies. Each infant in the village receives a string of beads within hours of birth, not just as an accessory, but as a tag of sorts. It identifies the child's lineage, spiritual totem, and sometimes the season they were born in. Lose that string, and you risk losing your place in the ancestral registry. One woman laughs as she recounts how her twin brothers accidentally swapped bead strings as babies and were thought to have traded souls. Mama was furious as she says, "We had to redo the whole ritual, with extra beads. And now you're shown a gift prepared for a wedding, a large bangle bracelet. Its inner rim lined with cowries, its outer edge dotted with tiny red and amber beads. For fertility, the bride's aunt explains, and for protection against bad gossip." You nod respectfully, even though you're still quietly processing how gossip protection works in bracelet form. A little girl tugs your sleeve. She offers you a bangle made of cracked clay and cheap plastic beads. You take it with a smile, and she beams like she's just crowned you king. And in a way, she has, because even this playful exchange mirrors the transactions that once ruled an empire. As the sun lowers over the plains, casting a soft amber hue over the earth, you sit by the fire with a few local traders. They recount the times when the markets of Ghana boomed so loud that camel caravans would line the horizon like waiting ships. One man swears his great-great-grandfather once bought an entire camel for a bangle woven with 5 golden beads. Biggest mistake of his life. He chuckles. Camel died in 2 weeks. Beads would have lasted generations. They all laugh, and so do you. And there, in the dying light of an ancient capital that no longer exists on maps but still beats in stories and bracelets, you realize wealth isn't always stored in banks. Sometimes it's wrapped around your wrist. Sometimes it walks beside you. Sometimes it jingles when you laugh. You're southward now, the terrain growing greener, lusher, and more alive with rhythm. Drums echo in the distance, not a song, but a signal. Patterns, pulses, language disguised as music. You're stepping into Zulu territory, and here, beads don't just speak, they shout, they whisper, they flirt. Welcome to Southern Africa, where the Zulu people perfected the use of beads not only as currency and decoration, but as a full-blown messaging system. You've entered a world where colour combinations are grammar, where pattern is dialect, and where a misplaced stripe could be the social equivalent of texting your boss "I love you" by mistake. You stroll through a village dotted with round thatched huts and children playing in the shade. Around their necks and wrists are strings of beads, bright, geometric, precise. But these aren't just random rainbows. You're told, quite firmly, that every Zulu bead speaks. Each one is part of a code. An elder woman greets you, dressed in a layered skirt and beaded sash that sparkles like confetti in the morning sun. She pulls you into her shaded courtyard, where baskets overflow with tiny beads sorted by colour: red, white, green, blue, yellow, black. Each one has a meaning, and it changes depending on where it sits in the pattern. She lifts one triangular beaded panel and holds it up. "This," she says, "I am engaged, but I still miss someone." You blink. She laughs. It's very popular. In Zulu culture, particularly among women, beadwork evolved into a complex form of non-verbal communication. Young women crafted and wore messages strung with intent. A white bead might mean purity. A red one could mean love, or anger depending on the order. Blue often indicated faithfulness, while yellow stood for wealth or a desire for it. Historians still argue whether the Zulu bead code was a standardized system or a more fluid, region-specific dialect. Some claim the patterns were tightly governed by strict rules. Others believe they allowed for individual expression, the way accents shift from town to town. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, like all language, both structured and living. And yes, men participated too, receiving beaded messages and sometimes replying with bead gifts of their own. But it was women who dominated this communication space. They crafted their feelings into wearable stories, entire emotional epics looped around their waists or strung across their chests. You're handed a small beaded bracelet made by a young woman nearby. The elder translates, "I dream of someone far away. He rides horses." He does not write. You ask if this is a common message. "Very," she replies, arching an eyebrow. Then there's the fringe tale of bead-breaking ceremonies, where two lovers no longer a match would meet under the supervision of an elder, remove their exchanged beads, and snap them over a fire. A final punctuation mark on a sentence written without a single spoken word. You walk on through the village and arrive at a small marketplace where beaded items shimmer like fish scales in sunlight. Among the trinkets are full vests, headdresses, and sandals adorned with precise symbols. You spot a set of wedding necklaces mirror images of each other, with matching colour sequences on opposite sides. These are for unity, the seller explains. If they don't match, the marriage will not. You nod slowly, then pause, and if one side breaks, she shrugs. Then it is a short story. One quirky practice still whispered about in some regions involves gossip beads. If a young woman felt wronged, say, by a rival or a suitor's mother, she could bead a coded message into a gift and send it to her target. If the other woman understood the message, she might send a response or retaliate with a sharper message. This beaded back and forth could last months, a kind of passive-aggressive poetry slam. You're invited to watch a demonstration now, a group of girls seated in a circle, each crafting beadwork while singing, not loudly, softly, humming, really. One sings about missing someone who no longer visits. Another sings about a red belt worn by the girl opposite her. There's gentle teasing, but also love, pride, and the warmth of shared tradition. And it strikes you, these aren't just bracelets or anklets. They're paragraphs, postcards, diaries. Each bead is a syllable, and each pattern a paragraph. One girl hands you a beaded band with a shy smile. "It means welcome," the elder whispers, "but also that you ask too many questions." You thank her anyway, bead diplomacy. As the sun sets, a light rain begins to fall. The village grows quiet, fires lit, shadows long. In the fading light, the bead patterns seem to shift, shimmering with meaning that wasn't there in full daylight. You sit quietly with the bracelet in your hands and realize that language doesn't have to be spoken. Sometimes it's woven in silence. Sometimes it dangles softly from a wrist. And sometimes it's left behind on a mat as a farewell or an invitation. Here in the Zulu lands, the beads don't just tell you who someone is, they tell you who they hope to become. You awaken to the sound of bells, not church bells, not alarms, but the gentle chime of beads brushing against one another in the morning breeze. You're sitting beneath a baobab tree, wide-trunked and wise, in a small village where time keeps itself on its own schedule. Today, you're not following kings or caravans. You're sitting with elders, and elders remember everything. You're handed a length of string, not for tying up anything, but for tying to something. The man beside you, eyes clouded but fingers sure, begins threading beads onto a cord. Each bead is placed with the care of a librarian returning a rare manuscript to its shelf. He says nothing at first, and then softly, "This string tells a story of 3 cows, 1 debt, and a missing uncle." You blink. He smiles. "Welcome to the world of bead record keeping, an old, mostly oral tradition where memory lives not in books or ledgers, but in strings, knots, and beads. And here, in this quiet region of West Africa, particularly among Yoruba and Akan communities, beads once served as ledgers, contracts, receipts, even wills. You sit among the elders, some stringing, others sorting, and a few just watching the fire. They explain how in the old days, when someone paid a dowry or received a loan, they didn't sign a contract, they tied a bead. And not just any bead, but a specific one shape, colour, material, all part of the agreement. A yellow bead with a tiny notch that might symbolise a debt to be repaid with grain. A string of 3 red beads separated by 1 white that could mark a marriage bond between 2 families, with a cow as collateral. It sounds absurd until you realise it worked for generations. Historians still debate how widespread this practice really was, whether it was a standardised form of record-keeping or more of a localised ritual. But one thing is clear for many African communities: memory wasn't just spoken, it was worn. You're shown a bead contract, carefully unwrapped from a calabash gourd. It's old, the colour's faded, but the order is intact. This string, you're told, records a land agreement between 2 clans. The presence of a rare blue bead marks royal arbitration. Another, the black, spiked one, means the land can't be sold, only inherited. You don't understand the full story, but they do. The beads hold it all, and here's a quirky little detail if a contract was disputed. The original string could be brought before elders to read, not aloud, but symbolically, like a fingerprint of consensus. The weight of truth was felt bead by bead, not paragraph by paragraph. You're handed a small wrist string next. Just 6 beads in total. The woman explains, "This was for a goat exchange between my grandfather and his friend. They argued for 2 moons. Finally, they agreed. This is the goat's price." She laughs. The goat ran away the next day. Beads weren't just for big deals. They tracked small things, too. Birth gifts, apology offerings, favours owed. A man might wear a necklace with 1 single bead placed off-centre, not for style, but as a quiet reminder, you still owe Kofi that basket of yams. Some elders would keep a gourd full of such strings, each one a micro-history. Some were traded back and forth like updates to a living contract. Others were retired, hung above doorways as proof of debts cleared, relationships healed, agreements honoured. You ask if people still use them today. The answer comes with a sigh, not like before. Now people want paper, signatures, phones, but paper can burn, phones forget. Beads, they stay. As you sit beneath the baobab, the branches swaying like giant, thoughtful arms, you realise how different this system was, not in complexity, but in intimacy. Every bead was touched, chosen, remembered. Every contract had a shape, a texture, a sound. You hear the faint clink of 2 strings knocking together in the breeze and imagine all the trades they've seen, all the promises they still hold. There's something deeply human in that record you wear close to your body, not locked away in a file cabinet or encrypted on a server, and for a moment, you imagine your own life strung out in beads. A blue one for the friend you've drifted from, a green one for the leap you're about to take, a red one for that time you said yes when you meant no, The elder beside you pats your knee. "Don't worry," he says. "You can always add more beads." You head toward the coastline again, but this time it's different. The markets are louder, the ships bigger, and the language more fractured. Portuguese, Dutch, French. The voices here don't sing in harmony, they clash in trade. You've entered the age of the European intrusion, and your bead journey has just hit a storm. You're standing at a port, maybe Elmina, maybe Ouida. Wooden ships creak in the harbour, sails flapping like nervous hearts. Men unload crates, and in between the heavy barrels and rusted guns, there's something small, shiny, and suspiciously cheerful beads. Thousands of them, bright, glassy, and totally not from around here. This is the moment in history when beads, once sacred, once rare, once wrapped in ritual and meaning, become weapons of a different kind. Welcome to the economy of colonization, where beads weren't just traded, they were used, and not in a good way. Europeans, especially the Portuguese, followed by the Dutch, the French, and the British, figured out something uncomfortable. Very quickly, African societies loved beads, and European factories, well, they had lots of them. Factories in Venice, Bohemia, and the Netherlands began churning out glass beads by the millions. The designs were beautiful, often modelled after the old rare trade beads, but the new ones cheaper, mass-produced, and intended for one thing: profit. You watch now as a Portuguese trader opens a crate filled with shiny blue beads and hands a handful to a local chief. They shake hands, not over friendship, not over food or cloth or stories, but over people. The beads weren't being exchanged for ivory or gold anymore. They were being used to buy slaves. One man, one woman, a child, all priced in bracelets. Historians still debate the scale of this bead-based transaction model. Some claim the beads were simply part of larger deals. Others say they were a central currency in the Atlantic slave trade. Regardless, the image is hard to shake: strings of beautiful things used in service of something unspeakably ugly. The bright irony. Some of those beads were deliberately flawed, containing bubbles, cracks, even sharp edges. Traders knew they'd be discarded quickly, which was fine. There were always more on the next boat, and more boats behind that. You step back from the docks and wander through the market, still crowded, still colourful. But the bead stalls feel different now, less reverent. You overhear someone selling Venetians for the price of millet, others offering a string of Dutch feather beads in exchange for a cow. The value system is being rewritten by outsiders, and yet something strange happens. The locals don't just absorb these new beads blindly, they recode them. You meet a woman stringing together the cheap new beads with older ones, creating hybrid necklaces that mean something only she can fully explain. Some she wears, some she trades, some she buries. Beads that arrived as economic tools are being folded into older traditions, their meanings bent, reshaped, reclaimed. A fringe fact in some regions, imported beads were given specific names like ekbemi in Yoruba, which roughly translates to those that come from over the water, not derogatory, not celebratory, just factual. A bead from a stranger. You sit beside a young man who collects only the flawed ones, the ugly beads, the bubbles, the broken strands. These are the truth. He tells you. The others lie. He's not wrong. The bead trade during the colonial period was a lie wrapped in beauty, a deal dressed in decoration, but still, communities found ways to twist it back into something personal, even when it hurt. You learn of a small community inland where women wore imported beads only during mourning. It was a quiet rebellion. If the beads bring sorrow, they said, then let them live in sorrow. That tradition, in whispers, survives today. And still, amid the exploitation and the cruelty, some local bead makers held on. They continued their craft in clay and shell and stone, refusing to let the imported beads erase them. They made new patterns, new codes. They taught their children the old meanings. They didn't stop speaking in colour. You visit a modern museum nearby and find a glass case filled with beads from this period. Some are dazzling, some are dull. All of them are stained with the touch of empire. The plaque reads beads as currency, 17th or 19th century. You wonder what stories the beads would tell if the case weren't so tightly sealed. As the tide rolls in and the smell of fish and firewood curls into the air, you sit on a quiet dock and watch the water darken. A boy beside you drops a single blue bead into the ocean. Plop, gone. For the ones who didn't come back, he says softly, and the waves, without question, take it. The dock fades behind you, and you follow a narrow road inland once again through towns that were once trade capitals, now weathered and worn by centuries of outside hands. You've passed through glory, through grief, and now you reach a moment of strange, sputtering transformation. This is colonial Africa, and it's a mess. You're in a town where the architecture is half European, half forgotten. Red earth bleeds into paved roads. A government building looms, its paint peeling. A dusty Union Jack or tricolour still nailed above a door that rarely opens. You're in the middle of a monetary identity crisis, because now the beads are being replaced. Here come the colonial rulers, papers in hand, officials in pressed cotton suits, declaring that beads are no longer legal tender. Unreliable, they say, barbaric. They want banknotes, coins, ledgers, official stamps, neat systems they can tax and track. You watch as a British administrator tries to convince a local elder to abandon bead strings for printed banknotes. The elder stares at the paper, turns it over, rubs it between his fingers, then tears it in half. "You can't wear that," he says, tossing the pieces aside. Colonial powers across Africa tried, with mixed results, to overhaul local economies. They introduced currencies based on gold and silver standards backed not by coral, not by craft, but by distant banks and foreign kings. And in many places, the change was slow, clumsy, and deeply resented. Historians still argue whether colonial authorities truly understood the role of beads in African societies, or if they deliberately ignored them as part of a broader cultural erasure. Some claim the shift was about modernization, others say it was about control. After all, a bead string can't be audited. It doesn't pay colonial salaries. It can't be printed in a mint in London or Paris. And so, bead markets were declared illegal in some regions. Bead-based taxes were no longer accepted. Bride prices paid in beads were invalid unless supplemented by coin. It wasn't just economic reprogramming, it was cultural dismantling. But beads are stubborn. You step into a local marketplace, expecting to find only coin and note, but tucked between stalls selling sugar and cigarettes, there is a beader's mat. A woman crouched low, hands moving fast, stringing blues, reds, and whites into bracelets that glow even under clouded light. She glances up and smiles. "You want government money?" she asks, teasing. "Go to the post office." You want real money, this is it. You buy a bracelet, not because you need one, because you understand now it's more than jewellery. It's defiance in daylight. Here's a quirky little detail from the colonial era in some regions. Bead strings were secretly used to back paper money, like makeshift banks. Families would store wealth in beads, then lend or borrow cash using their bead reserves as silent collateral. A secret economy under the official one, a whispered rebellion. You meet a retired tax collector now, who tells you of entire villages that paid their levies in coin by selling beads under the table. The government got its paper. He chuckles. But the people still had their value. And some colonial administrators, frustrated, tried to co-opt the bead system. They introduced token beads, little glass counters used in official ceremonies to mimic traditional exchanges. But the locals weren't fooled. Too smooth, they said. Too dead. Dead. That's what they called the new money. It didn't jingle. It didn't dance. You walk through a church compound now, where even the pews are marked with stringed beads counting donations, seating rites, maybe prayers. You ask a deacon if they still matter. Of course, he says. God knows what the ledger forgets. It's the twilight of the bead age, and yet, everywhere you look, they linger in hidden pouches, in wedding rituals, tucked into coffin corners, sewn into baptism gowns. Beads outlast bullets, outlast policies, sometimes even outlast memory. You sit with a group of elders under a mango tree. They pass around bead string from their youth, each one a story. One man tells you how his bride wore only local beads, refusing the colonial suggestion of pearls. She said pearls were too quiet. The group erupts in laughter. Quiet pearls, loud beads. Another man leans in close. When they made us use the Queen's money, I buried my beads right under the front steps. Every time I left the house, I stepped on them just to remember who I was. And so, as the evening wind stirs the mango leaves and distant drums begin their nightly call, you realize the colonial effort to erase beads wasn't just about changing currency. It was about rewriting identity. And it failed, because even now, decades later, the beads still shine, not in bank vaults, but in memory, in pride, in resistance. You leave behind the crumbling colonial outposts and follow the sound of bells, not European this time, but the deep, resonant ringing of Yoruba ritual. You're heading southwest, into Nigeria again, toward the homelands of the Yoruba people, where beads didn't just survive the colonial era, they thrived. It's early morning when you arrive at the gates of a compound near Ile-Ife. The air smells of smoke, honey, and crushed leaves. You hear singing soft, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and it's coming from inside a circle of dancers. Not one is empty-wristed. Not one has a bare neck. This isn't just pageantry. This is power. Sacred, storied, beaded power. You're welcomed into the compound by a priestess of ocean, the Yoruba deity of rivers, beauty, and love. Her wrists are stacked with gold, yellow, and orange beads, each glowing with the intensity of morning light. She smiles as if she knows a secret you've already started to guess. Beads, she says, are how the Orishas speak. In Yoruba cosmology, beads called ileke are more than decorations. They are divine signatures. Each Orisha, a type of deity or spiritual force, is associated with a colour, a pattern, a style of bead. Ocean prefers yellow and amber. Shango, god of thunder, wears red and white. Ogun, the iron warrior, favours dark greens and blacks. To wear a string of these beads is to invite that deity's presence. To earn them, you must be initiated, trained, and spiritually aligned. You can't just pop into a market and buy Shango's colours. That would be like wearing military medals you didn't earn. Beads here aren't aesthetic, they're credentials. Historians still argue whether Yoruba sacred bead systems developed independently or were influenced by trade beads from Europe and the Islamic world. Some insist that while foreign beads entered the mix, the symbolism was already deeply rooted. Others argue that the availability of new materials reshaped old practices. Either way, the result is unmistakable. Yoruba bead culture is a masterwork of spiritual engineering. You sit now beside a beader, an older woman with steady hands and eyes that don't blink often. She's creating a waist bead for a young woman about to undergo a rite of passage. This string, she says, remembers her. It protects her. It binds her to her people. You notice the rhythm in her hands: 4 yellows, 2 reds, 1 gold. Pause. Repeat. The pattern isn't random, it's math, memory, and mantra. A sacred algorithm strung in glass. Here's a quirky tidbit among the Yoruba. There's a belief that beads can carry intention. If you string a bead while speaking a prayer or a wish, that energy is locked into the bead. When worn, it continues to whisper that prayer against your skin. Beads, then, are wearable spells. You're invited to a naming ceremony that evening. A newborn is being presented to the community, and the infant is adorned with tiny strings of ilike across the ankles and wrists. The elder announcing the name holds up a blue and white bead symbolic of clarity, protection, and spiritual connection. This child, he says, belongs to the waters, and everyone nods, because the bead said it first. Later, you walk past a shrine, its altar stacked with offerings, kola nuts, carved statues, coins, and beads, looped, draped, and woven into the structure itself. You're told that the Orishas eat the energy of beads, not literally but spiritually. A gift of beads is an offering of time, intent, and devotion. You wonder, what does it mean to offer your craft to the divine? You think about your world where offerings are often digital, impersonal, a text, a tweet, a donation link. And yet here, a small string of beads carries the weight of sacrifice, and it's beautiful. You're led to a masked ceremony now, where the Agungan, the ancestral spirits, dance through the compound. Their robes shimmer with layers upon layers of beads. Each layer is a story, a lineage, a forgotten name sewn back into the present. One dancer whirls past you, and for a moment, you lock eyes, or you think you do. You feel dizzy. The beads flash. You forget your questions. You remember only rhythm. Afterward, you sit with the priestess again, beneath a moon that looks close enough to string like a bead of its own. She holds your wrist gently and looks at your collection. These, she says, are pretty, but none of them know your name. You ask if that's bad. She smiles. No, it just means you still have time. Dawn again, and the rooster's crow feels like applause for what you've just seen. The sacred beads of the Yoruba still shimmer in your mind, but the road calls. As always, you journey onward west, this time toward the Gold Coast, now Ghana, where the Atlantic breeze returns and the markets speak in 10 different languages. All at once, you're heading toward the hands behind the beads. You arrive in a town lined with open-air workshops and long tables dusted with pigment. The air smells like ash, clay, and sweat. Women crouch beside kilns, feeding the flames with broken glass and powdered dye, and they're set out like tiny suns drying on woven mats, are rows upon rows of freshly made beads. Here, the economy hums not just because of kings or trade routes, but because of women. Bead making, especially in regions like Krobo and Ashanti, has long been a woman's domain, not exclusively, but dominantly. From grinding glass shards into powder to shaping molds from termite clay, to carefully firing and painting each bead by hand, this is meticulous work, meditative and generational. You sit with a woman named Ama, whose hands move so quickly you can barely follow. She smiles without looking up. My mother made beads. Her mother made beads. My daughter makes TikToks. We'll see what survives. She laughs, and so do you. You ask how long a necklace takes. Depends. She shrugs. A funeral one, 2 days. A wedding 1, 3, maybe 4, but a divorce one, just a few hours. We've had practice. There's a joke in there, sure, but also a truth beads are tied to life events, and the women who make them are the quiet chroniclers of entire communities. Historians still argue whether women controlled bead production alone or also dominated their trade. Some believe male chiefs and merchants handled the big exchanges. Others suggest women operated powerful market networks, using bead making as a form of economic autonomy in patriarchal systems. The debate, as always, is complicated. What's clear is this: behind every beaded wrist in the market, there's likely a woman who shaped each piece in fire, breath, and time. Amma shows you how she mixes the powder recycled glass ground fine, combined with natural dyes. She explains how certain colours were once made from crushed leaves, burned snail shells, or even termite mounds. Now, she says, gesturing to a small box, we get dyes from China, but they don't smell right. You lean closer to one of her moulds. It's a simple clay disc with tiny holes, each one filled with ground glass. She places it carefully into a kiln made of brick, then watches the fire do its work. You watch too, mesmerized by the soft glow, the hiss of heat, the crackle of birth. Later, she shows you finished beads sorted into categories: one set for puberty rites, another for elder blessings, one with cowrie inlays for fertility, and a rare string of old king beads, large, brilliantly coloured, worn only by chiefs or passed down in funerary rituals. A fringe fact: some king beads are so big and heavy that they're rarely worn, just held or displayed, and some have even been buried in the walls of homes for protection, like guardians made of glass. You meet another beader, a teenage girl, this time threading tiny clay beads onto a wrist cord. She's humming, her head bowed. You ask what she's making. Love bracelet, she says. You ask who it's for. She blushes. Not sure yet. Beads are still how feelings are shared when words fall short. A string can say, I love you, I forgive you, or I'm not talking to you until you return my goat, all without a single syllable. In the market later that day, you spot the very same bracelet, now on a boy's wrist. He's grinning like someone just handed him a kingdom, and maybe, in bead terms, they did. You're told that entire families can be traced through beadwork, each region, each clan, each house even, developing its own signature styles. Some patterns are taught only to daughters, others are whispered to apprentices, sworn to secrecy. You sit quietly with one group as they string beads for an upcoming festival. They don't speak, but their fingers do. Tap, thread, pull, loop. They work in rhythm, like an old song you don't know the words to, but feel in your chest anyway. You look down at the beads in your palm, simple, handmade, imperfect in the way only real things are. Each one a spark, a breath, a life. And you realize that while kings wore them, and merchants traded them, and priests blessed them, it was the women who made them last. You're heading inland again now, away from the markets, the coastlines, and the clamour. The road narrows, trees crowd closer, and the air grows still. You're entering a quieter kind of memory, one that lives underground, under stones, under stories half told. This is burial ground country. Here, beads don't sell, they stay. You're brought to a patch of forest cleared by time and reverence. The soil is red and rich, and the only sounds are your footsteps and the soft buzz of insects who seem to understand the sacredness of silence. An elder meets you at the edge of the clearing. He doesn't speak at first, just points. A low, grass-covered mound. Another and another. Graves. Ancient ones. No markers, no names. But if you were to dig, and you won't, you'd find beads. Lots of them. Because here, as in many parts of Africa, beads went to the afterlife. In some cultures, a Khan, Yoruba, Igbo. And beyond beads were buried with the dead to provide beauty, protection, or guidance in the next world. Some believe they acted as offerings to ancestors. Others say they were a kind of spiritual currency, payment for safe passage, or status symbols that extended beyond death. You sit down near one of the mounds and listen as the elder begins to speak, slowly, like someone reading a sacred scroll. He tells you of a girl who died young and was buried with the beads her mother strung for her. Of a chief whose entire regalia was buried with him, including heavy strings of coral, bronze bells, and bone-carved talismans. So the ancestors would recognize him, the elder says, and not mistake him for a servant. Historians still argue whether these bead burials were meant to enrich the spirit, appease the ancestors, or simply honour tradition. Some suggest they were practical, marking the social rank of the dead. Others believe they were deeply metaphysical, gifts to gods, tools for reincarnation, memory anchors for the soul. What is certain, beads were the last thing the living gave to the dead. And sometimes, the first thing archaeologists find when they disturb those layers of silence. You're shown a tiny museum nearby, run not by a government, but by a family. Inside glass boxes lined with faded cloth are strings of burial beads pulled from excavated graves after permission. Always permission. Some are tiny, barely larger than sand grains. Others are thick, weighty, and cracked with age. There's a string of dark green glass beads said to be nearly 1,000 years old, another made of cowries and carved bone. One case features a broken bracelet with a rusted iron clasp and a small tag worn by a child. Cause of death, unknown. You step away, quiet. And then comes the fringe story in certain communities. It was believed that if the dead returned restless, angry, or simply confused, their bead strings would clatter in the night. People would say, someone's spirit is knocking, and elders might dig a small hole near the grave to listen, to soothe, or to add another string just in case. A woman nearby tells you that her grandmother left instructions for her burial beads. Not just what kind, but where. 2 on the ankles, 1 around the neck, and 3 on the left wrist. She recites, "Don't get it wrong, or I'll wake you myself." You believe her. At sunset, you attend a remembrance ceremony. A group of drummers and singers gather under the open sky. Families arrive, some in silence, some in colour, and many wear beads once owned by the deceased. This isn't mourning in black, it's memory in full colour. You watch as a woman stands and slowly removes a bracelet from her wrist, faded red beads, chipped and old. She places it on a small mat in front of the altar, whispering something you can't hear. Then she walks away. You ask someone what the beads meant. They were her sister's, comes the reply. She says they still smell like home. Later, you sit by the fire with a group of bead makers and elders, passing around old strings and new ones. Each one has a story, a name, a place where it once lived or where it will rest. You hold a single green bead up to the firelight. It glows faintly. Maybe it belonged to someone 100 years ago. Maybe it was made yesterday. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it endures. And maybe, when you're gone, it will still be here tucked into a grave, held in a hand, whispered about in stories. Because in a world that forgets fast, beads remember. You travel now along a quieter path, one that winds between farmland and scattered homes. Chickens scatter as you pass. A child runs barefoot across the path, beads jangling around her ankles, laughing without a care. But you're looking for someone different, someone with ledgers, not laughter. Today, you're walking with the bead tax man. Yes, bead tax. You heard right. You arrive in a small town where stories still live long after the last official stamp faded. The villagers remember when taxes weren't paid in coin or bills but in beads. Bright, jangling, negotiable beads. You're invited into the courtyard of an old man wearing a faded cotton wrapper and a necklace thick enough to anchor a canoe. I collected bead tax, he says proudly, sitting upright like a retired king, and no one ever dared shortchange me. He pulls out a small basket filled with strings of beads, his record-keeping system. Some are bundled neatly, others tied into knots that mark the end of a payment cycle. 1 string for land, he says, 2 strings for the palm grove. Add another if your goats got into the chief's millet. You try not to laugh, but he winks, he knows it's ridiculous. And wonderful. You see, in certain parts of pre-colonial and even early colonial Africa, where currency systems were still local and cash rare, taxes were often paid in kind: grain, cloth, livestock, and beads. Beads were easy to count, transport, and most importantly store without rotting or running off into the bush. Historians still argue whether bead taxation was widespread or limited to just a few regions. Some records mention entire village levies paid in coral and cowries. Others describe bead contributions for festivals, war efforts, or royal gifts. As usual, the truth is patchy, but the stories ring clear. Like this one, the elder tells you of a man who once tried to cheat the system by soaking clay beads in oil to make them shine like glass. Fooled no one. He chuckles, except his son, who inherited the punishment. You're led now to the village archive, not a library, but a cool clay room lined with gourds and calabashes, each one filled with old beads. They're labelled not with ink, but with thread colours and wood carvings. Each gourd belongs to a family. Each set of beads records past obligations, payments, and occasional disputes. A quirky tidbit in some towns, bead collectors wore specific uniforms, long robes with beaded collars, meant to show both status and restraint. You didn't argue with a bead collector. You didn't flirt with one, either. They were seen as half accountant, half oracle. You sit with the elder as he shows you his old ledger, a folded strip of bark cloth with beads sewn into it in horizontal rows. He taps each row with a knuckle. That one, tap, was when the river flooded. Tap. That one was when the chief's goat disappeared. Tap. And that one, he smiles, was when I got married. You glance at the bead. It's gold glass, slightly chipped, but still radiant. Later, you accompany him through the village as he teaches a younger man how to collect symbolic taxes for the annual festival. No real levy, just a tradition now. Each household offers a bead, chosen carefully, representing something they wish for the coming year: peace, rain, children, forgiveness. One woman offers a deep blue bead and says, "For fewer headaches." The taxman nods solemnly. Another offers clear bead with the single red dot. "For my son to return." No one laughs. These are taxes of hope. By sunset, the bead basket is half full, and the younger collector seems exhausted. "It's not the walking," he says, "it's the stories." You nod, because each bead carries one, and when you collect hundreds, you collect not just payments, but memory, burden, prayer. You return to the courtyard and sit with the elder one last time. He hands you a small bead, milky white with a spiral cut around its edge. "For you," he says. You ask what it means. "Nothing," he says with a grin. Yet, you roll it between your fingers. It's cool, smooth, weightless, and yet somehow it already holds something. You wake to drums, but these aren't market drums or funeral drums. These are slower, lower rhythmic like breath. You've wandered now into a realm wrapped in secrecy, into groves where few are invited. Welcome to the world of African secret societies, where beads don't just whisper, they guard. You're led by torchlight, yes. Really into a forest clearing marked by carved stones and twisted trees. The path you walk isn't straight, it never is. Circles, spirals, backtracking. You're being tested already. Eventually, you reach a hut so quiet the air itself seems to hesitate. A man emerges, or perhaps an initiate. He wears a full body costume of raffia and cloth, and across his chest and waist are beads black, red, green, strung in looping patterns that don't just shimmer, they signal. You've entered the domain of the Poro, or is it the Ekpe, maybe the Ogboni, hard to say. Many of Africa's most influential secret societies operate across ethnic lines, and secrecy is the entire point. But what they share is this: beads are their code. These societies held spiritual, judicial, and political power. They settled disputes, enforced laws, guided kings, and trained future leaders. Their authority was symbolized in masks, rituals, carvings, and beadwork so carefully patterned it might as well be Morse code. You're shown a staff, wooden, topped with copper, wrapped in beaded strands. It's not decorative, it's jurisdictional. Whoever carries it doesn't just own power, they carry it visibly. If you wear the wrong beads, you're told, you speak words you don't understand. You ask what that means. The initiate replies, it means you might say yes to something that cost you your voice. Historians still argue whether these societies adopted bead codes from older cultural practices or invented their own visual lexicons. Some suggest they grew organically out of clan symbolism. Others argue bead patterns were used deliberately to conceal knowledge from the uninitiated. What's clear? The beads don't just represent knowledge, they restrict it. A spiral of red and white might mean leadership in one clan, but treachery in another. The same bead could bless or curse depending on who reads it and how. You're shown a mask next. It's not worn, only displayed. The face is long and expressionless, but the beadwork over the eyes is mesmerizing black beads forming crosses with single white beads at the corners. This one sees dishonesty, your guide says, even in the dark. Then there's the dance. Oh yes, every society has its dance. You sit on a wooden stool as masked figures emerge and begin to move. Their beads clink softly with each step. The dance isn't random, it's ceremonial storytelling. Each twist of the wrist, each sway of the hip is tied to patterns of beads worn on ankles, chests and belts, a fringe tidbit. In some societies, initiates weren't allowed to speak aloud during certain months. They communicated entirely with beaded bracelets, each colour combination and knot pattern acting as phrases. One such phrase, you're told, means I will return before the next moon. Another means I saw what you did. We'll talk later, and yes, they had jokes too. One bracelet reads, your goat is ugly but useful. Back in the hut, you're shown a ledger not of numbers, but of bead strings. Each one represents a member, a decision, a secret. The strings hang from pegs like keys to locked doors. You ask how they're read. With the heart, says the elder. You glance again at the beads on your wrist. They seem smaller now. Before you leave, the group allows you to sit in the outer circle of a ceremony just to watch, not to speak. A long chant begins, and the firelight catches on 100 tiny beads woven into the robes of the masked leaders. They sway. They raise their staffs. They point to the stars. You don't understand the language, but you understand the message. Some knowledge isn't written. Some power isn't shouted. And some stories are told bead by bead, danced rather than declared. As the fire burns low and the chanting softens into night, you feel the weight of history not in pages but in strings, in loops, in colours that can't be translated. And as the masks vanish back into the trees, you know this much: the beads are watching, mourning again. But something's changed. The breeze carries the buzz of motors instead of drums. The path beneath your feet hardens into asphalt. There are still beads here, but now they hang behind glass. You've reached the threshold of the modern era, and the shine has started to dim. Welcome to the machine age. You find yourself in a town on the verge, half tradition, half transistor. Old market stalls now sit beside cell phone kiosks. A woman strings beads while her teenage daughter live streams it. And in the middle of it all stands a museum with clean floors, fingerprinted display cases, and a gift shop selling replica bead necklaces in bubble wrap. And yet, despite the curated lighting and helpful placards, something is missing. You lean in close to one case, beads of the Benin court. It reads, coral red, cylindrical, perfect, but they don't feel alive anymore. Behind glass, they're artifacts, objects of interest. Once currency, once power, now inventory. You wander outside, to the edge of the museum grounds, where a small group of artisans still work the old way, grinding, moulding, stringing, not for kings or gods or dowries for tourists. A man gestures at his tray of necklaces. These ones go to Europe, these ones to America, these TikTok. You nod. It's a living. But something about the way he says it, bright smile, tired eyes, makes it clear the beads are still here, but the meaning's gone fuzzy. You sit beside a woman etching a pattern into a glass bead with a tiny metal pick. People don't understand anymore, she says. They buy blue when they mean to say red. They wear love bracelets to funerals. She shrugs. I still make them, but they don't listen to the beads. Historians still debate when, exactly, the bead economy collapsed. Was it during the colonial overhaul, the introduction of paper money, the rise of industrial manufacturing, or when markets went global, and you could buy a Maasai necklace in a mall in Michigan? The answer, of course, is all of the above. Bit by bit, the old meaning slipped away, and yet, in the most unexpected corners, the clink of bead strings still survives. You visit a small village school where children are learning bead patterns as part of cultural heritage lessons. "This is for peace," the teacher says, holding up a string of white and blue. "And this is for telling your grandmother she was right." The children giggle, but they remember one quirky detail in some African cities today. Fashion designers have revived beadwork as high art. Runways in Lagos, Dakar, and Johannesburg feature models draped in modern bead interpretations, pieces that echo old symbols but pulse with new intent, power, beauty, heritage rewoven for 21st century eyes. You visit one such workshop. The designer shows you her latest collection. "This one," she says, "is for heartbreak, and this one for rage." No one buys it. They're afraid it works. She grins. You believe her. Back on the road, you pass a street vendor selling strings of beads next to knockoff sunglasses and phone chargers. You watch as a young man picks up a bracelet, frowns, puts it down, picks another. "What are you looking for?" you ask. He shrugs. "Something real, I guess. Aren't we all?" You ask the vendor where she learned her craft. "My aunt," she says. "She taught me the patterns. I forgot most of them, but I remember how her hands moved. That's still in me." You watch her hands, now swift, certain, weathered. You don't recognize the pattern, but it feels right. So you buy one. Later, you sit in a quiet cafe, city lights flickering like fireflies around you. You lay out your bead collection scattered across the table like tiny witnesses. From the coast to the desert, from burial ground to festival dance, from wedding to tax hut, all here, all real. And you realize the machine age may have dulled their luster, but not their story, because even now, long after their peak, beads remain, not because they're useful, but because they're human, handmade, imperfect, durable, quietly defiant, a whisper in a world that won't stop shouting. And now, the road curves back toward the present. You arrive in a town buzzing with colour. Street murals burst with images of dancing women in beaded skirts. Children weave through traffic wearing bead-strung anklets that jingle like laughter. This isn't a museum, it's a celebration. You've landed at a bead festival. Welcome to Krobo land, Eastern Ghana where, against all odds, the beads never left. You follow a rhythm that pulses through the town like a heartbeat drums, singing, stamping feet. You're ushered into a crowd, strangers clapping you on the back, adjusting the bead strand slipping from your shoulder like you're one of their own. The festival is Depo, a coming-of-age ceremony where young women are adorned in dazzling beadwork, taught the responsibilities of womanhood, and honoured as the future of their people. They wear beads on their arms, waists, necks, and legs, layers and layers of symbolism, tradition, and sheer beauty. You spot one girl whose waist beads stretch in dozens of rows, each colour singing a message. Her mother made those, someone tells you, each string for each year. You wonder how many stories her hips are telling, and it's not just Depo. Across Africa today, beads still live, In Kenya, the Maasai create towering bead collars that blend cultural memory with modern fashion. In Nigeria, brides still don coral beads, as bold and unyielding as their ancestors. In South Africa, Zulu bead codes survive in wedding patterns, graduation gifts, even political protests. Historians might debate the economic collapse of beads, but culturally they've never stopped glowing. You walk past a stall where a man sells healing beads, combinations believed to ease pain, calm anger, or bring love. A woman walks away wearing a new anklet and says, "He told me it will help me sleep or attract better dreams." A quirky little twist. There's an app now, yes, really, that translates traditional bead colours and patterns into modern emojis. It's mostly used by teenagers. Some elders hate it. Others secretly use it. You see two girls giggling over it at a food stall. One flashes her wrist bead. The other texts her a single purple heart. It's the old code, reborn. As the sun sets, dancers take the field, their bodies gleaming with oil, sweat, and colour. The crowd claps along. No one watches through a screen. No one asks for a price. The beads swing and shimmer in time with the drums. You sit beneath a tree, your travel-worn sandals dusty, your pockets a little heavier with every step you've taken. Inside them a Saharan moon bead, a burial bead, a tax string, a child's bracelet, a king's cast-off, and one you still don't fully understand. You hold that last one up to the fading light, the spiral bead from the elder tax collector. It glows soft white, warm from your palm, and you realise now the beads were never the money. They were the memory, the meaning, the message. You smile. You add the spiral bead to the string around your wrist, tie it in place, and let your arm fall back into your lap, the clink of glass as familiar as breath. And then, the drums soften in the distance now. The festival fades into warm shadows and flickering firelight. You lean back against the tree, eyes growing heavy, the night folding around you like a soft cotton wrapper. The beads on your wrist cool against your skin. Each one still hums with a memory not loud, not urgent, just present. Like tiny stars clinging to a quiet sky. A breeze moves through the leaves above. It sounds like the shuffle of bead strands being gently stirred in a basket. The same sound elders once heard as they counted the wealth of a family. The same sound traders listen for as they pass through desert gates. The same sound a mother hears as her child moves in sleep. Beads rustling like soft thunder. You breathe slowly. You feel grounded. The roads you walked today spanned centuries, but you never really left the present, did you? The past simply slipped beside you, matching your pace, whispering its stories through shell, clay, glass, and fire. Now your body sinks deeper into the earth, and the world dims. The beads around your wrist are still there, but they don't feel like decoration anymore. They feel like home, like rhythm, like rest. And somewhere, not far off, another bead is being strung onto another thread, a new story, starting from scratch. But for now, your story is paused, and you're allowed to sleep.